Today I'm going to show you guys how to use Russian piping tips and how I made this single layer floral cake. Just like always, I began by spreading a dab of buttercream onto my cake board. So today's cake is going to be a single layer cake, which is pretty rare for me, but this is just one 7-inch layer of my favorite vanilla layer cake recipe. So before we begin to decorate this with all of those flowers, we're going to cover it with a layer of green buttercream. And this is just my favorite American buttercream that I frost all of my cakes with, and I've colored it green using a few drops of AmeriColor's leaf green gel food coloring. I used a small offset spatula to spread the frosting around the cake until it was completely covered. Once the frosting was nice and smooth, I placed it in the freezer for about 5 minutes to allow it to chill. And next comes the really fun part when we're going to be adding on our Russian piping tip flowers. So this is my first tip that I'm using, and it's part of an assorted pack of 6 that I purchased on Amazon. I'll include the link below. So as you begin to pipe these flowers, you want to make sure that the base of the frosting anchors to the cake and that you very slowly pull up to create the flower. So to do this, you need really stiff buttercream. That's the most important thing. So when I make my buttercream recipe, I add 1 tablespoon less heavy cream than I normally do. If your buttercream is too thin, the flowers won't hold their shape as you try to pipe them. So if you run into that, just try adding a bit more powdered sugar to your buttercream to help thicken it. I've also used 2 different colors of buttercream in this bag to create kind of a striped look, which is a really fun way to kind of spruce up your flowers. So this is my second frosting tip, and as you can see, the pattern is slightly different, and this is going to create more of a rose-shaped flower. So another thing that I like to do as I pipe these is to shake a little bit when I get to the top, and that kind of helps the end of the flower kind of pull away from the flower tip and keep its shape. So the next piping tip has a much different shape, and I've used some blue buttercream around the edge of my piping bag, and I filled the center with some white buttercream. And I really like doing that because I think it helps the petals really stand out and makes the center of the flower more distinct. So as you guys can see, these flowers are much different than the other 2 tips that we've used. They have kind of more of a pointed petal and a much different center. For my next Russian piping tip, I filled the bag with some red buttercream, and I'm going to continue to use the same techniques to pipe these flowers. So I chose to use a lot of bright colors, kind of true colors like red, orange, yellow, and blue, but you can really do whatever shades you prefer. It would also be a lot of fun to do different shades of the same color. I think that would have a really stunning effect. This is the last tip that I used to add flowers onto this cake, and I used an orange buttercream to fill the bag. And for this, I really just filled in any spots where I saw openings, and also I was not afraid to overlap over flowers that I had already piped. I think it's totally fine to go over some flowers, especially if there's any that don't turn out quite the way you wanted them to, or that don't really pull away from the tip properly. So once I had completely covered the top of the cake with those beautiful buttercream flowers, I began to pipe some grass on the sides of the cake. So to make these various shades of green, I used the same shade of gel food coloring and just added different amounts to each bowl of my frosting. So since this cake is only 1 layer, it's super easy to pipe on these strands of grass. And if you didn't want to make this many shades, you totally don't have to. I just really enjoy having the different colors to give the cake a little bit more dimension. I also filled in around the edge where there were any small openings with a bit more grass. And that's all there is to it. So the most important factors of using Russian piping tips is making sure that you have good quality tips and that your buttercream is really nice and stiff. So because this cake is a single layer cake, the ratio of frosting to buttercream is pretty intense, especially with all of those flowers on top. But luckily I really love frosting, so for me this is perfect. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you guys have any questions about this technique or about these frosting tips, feel free to ask them in the comment section below.